Chris, thank you for joining us again. I don't know if you heard my monologue, but I summarized the situation of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, the pathetic nature of the Arab government response, and the extent to which none of this would be happening if it were not for Joe Biden. How do you feel about those areas yourself?
Well, the only significant response to the genocide comes from Yemen. The rest of the Arab world is either silent at best or complicit. Certainly Egypt is complicit. It's in the process of building an alternative open-air prison for the Palestinians as they are pushed out of the open-air prison built by the Israelis in Gaza. Yeah, it's very, very cynical. I don't think it plays very well on the Arab street. I was just in Doha and just in Egypt not too long ago. But yeah, a government like, especially the Egyptian government, is very hostile to Hamas. Of course, they crushed, the Sisi government crushed the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it's very, very cynical. I heard in your monologue this kind of ridiculous dog and pony show of dropping a few supplies into the sea. Of course, they could come through the gates of Rafah. They won't. And Joe Biden, this genocide would not have gone on as long as it has and would not be sustained but for Washington. They have sent hundreds of millions of dollars of munitions because the Israelis are bombing. I remember I was in Sarajevo during the war. I think you were in Bosnia too, but I was in Sarajevo during the war. So that was 300 to 400 shells a day. And that resulted in about 4 to 5 dead a day, about 24 wounded a day. Well, compare that with Gaza. That's hundreds of dead and wounded a day. The bombing, and I don't pretend that Sarajevo was easy. I still have nightmares about it, but it's nothing compared to Gaza. I mean, we haven't seen anything, a bombing campaign of this level. You'd have to go back to Vietnam or maybe to Stalingrad or something where the Germans destroyed 70% of the buildings in Stalingrad. I mean, that's the level the Israelis are reaching at. The plan is clear. It's open. It is to create a humanitarian crisis of such catastrophic proportions, infectious diseases, starvation, not to mention, of course, now the last hospital is shut down. There's no medical care, no infrastructure, no clean water. People are sleeping out in the open. The idea is to create a crisis that is so extreme that the Palestinians, many at what point, 1.2 million, 1.4 million or something, now pushed up against the border of Egypt around Rafah, have a choice between death and exile, ethnic cleansing. And cutting off this money to UNRWA, of course, is almost unfathomable because, of course, it's aiding the starvation that is part of being weaponized by Israel in this genocide. In the United States, the UK, all these governments are complicit.
You know, the building of an open-air prison will merely transfer the problem by a few hundred yards. All the existing crises, multiple, will then exist on Egyptian soil. The resistance will be amongst the refugees that are driven out. Certainly the children, surviving children of the resistance, will grow up there to be a part of a new resistance. Nothing will be solved at all by driving the Palestinian population out of Gaza, merely transferred and only a few hundred yards.
Yeah, and that's initially why Sisi didn't want. You remember when Blinken first went to the Middle East, and Blinken is just a bag carrier for the Netanyahu government, he made a sweep through the Arab world and proposed that Arab governments take quotas, numbers. I think Egypt was 1.1 million Palestinians and, I don't know, 700,000 in Iraq or something. Of course, roundly rejected for all of the reasons you just cited. But the Egyptian government is very pliable because its economy is a disaster. It's, I think, $161 billion or something in debt. And the United States is capable of buying it off. I don't know how else to explain the construction that is now being put up around Gaza. It's certainly not what they say it is for trucks. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely out in the open. We're watching it. But you're right. You've traumatized an entire generation. How do you think they're going to react? How would we react? And that will mean that there will be cross-border raids, and Israel, if these Gazans are trapped in the Sinai, then this conflict not only will it go on in perpetuity for another generation, but you're right, it will, of course, involve Egypt. So the whole thing is a complete catastrophic mess, and I really blame Washington. Washington has the ability to pull the plug on this today with a phone call. The Israelis cannot sustain this without U.S. support. But the people running our policies in the Middle East out of the Biden White House essentially don't have a clue as to what they're doing. Jake Sullivan, Brett McGurk, and Blinken, who sees Sullivan and McGurk have no real experience. McGurk was in Iraq, and he was just a disaster. They don't speak Arabic. They don't know the Arab world. They don't understand the history, culturally, linguistically illiterate. So everything is seen through the prism of Israel. And I think there's a pretty healthy dose of racism and bigotry and Islamophobia that go along with it. And there is a certain disquiet, by the way, among the Arabists, both in the State Department and in the intelligence services, because they realize that this is just being incredibly mishandled. And you have seen junior government officials in USAID headed by Samantha Power, in the irony of that, of course, Miss Genocide with a problem from hell book, and in the State Department and in the executive branch, there have been pretty severe protests. And I think it's not just protests over the genocide, but over what I would call gross incompetence.
On the mention of Power, she tweeted today that she had entered Israel across the Allenby Bridge in Jordan, thus at a stroke, linguistically at least, wiping out the fact that the West Bank is officially, legally, Palestinian occupied territory. She actually said, I've just stepped into Israel across the Allenby Bridge. Is this illiteracy, or does it have a wider meaning, by which I mean this? After Gaza, is it the West Bank?
I think that's certainly the intent. I mean, the intent of the Netanyahu government is clear and has been clear for some time. That is to ethnically cleanse, drive out the 2.2, 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza and turn on the West Bank. These are heirs of the radical fascistic Rabbi Meir Kahane, who I covered and knew in Jerusalem. I don't think liberal Zionism, was just as brutal as to Palestinians, but this religious Zionism is kind of messianic, cruder, and more open about their intent, perhaps, than liberal Zionism. So yes, they would like to, quote unquote, cleanse. Samantha Power, I knew her in Bosnia. She was a freelance reporter when I was the New York Times bureau chief there. Yeah, she knows exactly what she is doing. She's a consummate careerist. She is, and has been since the Obama administration, she caters to the Israel lobby because she knows to run afoul of the Israel lobby, and Israel is detrimental to her career. She wants to be Secretary of State, of course, one day. So, yeah, she knew precisely what she was saying, and she was pleasing her Israeli hosts. So, these people have no moral core at all.
Let's return then to Washington, or more particularly to Michigan. What's your take on what happened in the primary last night, where 104,000 people voted uncommitted on a coronation ballot for Joe Biden?
Well, that's a sign of how dangerous it is, because remember, they were only trying to get 10,000. So they got 10 times that number. Biden's in serious trouble for many reasons, including Gaza. But what does Bibi Netanyahu care? He prefers Trump. He's quite willing to sacrifice Biden. He has no interest in propping up Biden. He don't even like Biden, really. So it's all good. It's all good for Bibi. But yeah, he's in serious trouble. The base is, the youth vote, the Arab American vote, which is significant in Michigan. Of course, I live in New Jersey, which has the second largest Arab American community in the country. They are not going to vote for Biden. They are not going to do it. So, and it's such a slim margin that he has to win, because both sides are kind of essentially struggling over that uncommitted vote. So I think he's in real political trouble. And I think that Michigan is an indication of that.
What about Zion Don? What's he saying? We don't see over here much of what he's saying on the subject, although we know his history, and we know the history of his son-in-law in particular. Is there any daylight between Trump's view on what's happening in Gaza and Joe Biden's?
No, I think for a Palestinian it wouldn't make any difference. Remember, Biden, after Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem in violation of international law, Biden didn't move it back. The Democratic leadership, Chuck Schumer, they all supported the move to Jerusalem. No, I think that in terms of, I think the Biden administration, especially with Blinken, has been utterly obsequious to Netanyahu, not just running cover for them at the United Nations by canceling ceasefire agreements, but by making sure they have a steady supply of munitions. I think they ship a lot of it, as does the UK, to Cyprus, and then they fly it by transport helicopters. It was about a 40-minute flight or something into Tel Aviv. Because the Israelis, the level of munitions that they're going through on a daily basis is so staggering. They need American stockpiles, and they get it. They get it from Trump. They get it from Biden. It won't make any difference.
Finally, Chris, a slight change of subject, though not entirely. It's 2 years on in the NATO proxy war against Russia. Any sign of the U.S. administration beginning to prepare the public for inevitable defeat of their project? And what is Trump saying about that now?
Well, the way they prepare for the defeat is the same way they prepared for the defeat in Afghanistan, which is they stop talking about it and the press stops covering it. You hardly know it's there. So yes, they are preparing. Of course, everything, a negotiated settlement they could have gotten before the war. They didn't. And I just want to say, by the way, the whole argument that somehow the West would not allow the nationalist Ukrainian government to carry out ethnic cleansing and campaigns of genocide in the Donbass is kind of exposed, by the way, with Gaza. You see precisely how we react. So they're just a small caveat, but there's that lie that they were telling. I mean, the U.S. achieved its goals. What were its goals? To isolate Putin from Europe and to degrade the Russian military. And of course, they very cynically made the Ukrainians pay. The friend of mine was in Ukraine. He said they're all recruiting 40-year-old guys. They don't want to go. It's just been a complete disaster. It's destroyed huge swaths of the country, but the United States doesn't care. I covered proxy wars for much of my career as a foreign correspondent. So yes, they'll abandon the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians will essentially have to engage in a land for peace settlement. That all could have been done before. And it wasn't. It wasn't in the U.S. interest to do it. But it wasn't in the Ukrainian interest to believe that the American empire, the American government was ever really ultimately on their side. This was all about Russia, and it was all about isolating Putin. And they've done that. That's their goal, and they've achieved it.
And Trump, is he still promising to finish it all before he's even inaugurated?
In Ukraine? I mean, the Republicans have been the only serious opposition to funding Ukraine. The Democratic Party in the United States is the war party now. So, yeah, there is significant opposition. And the American public is tired of it, too. I mean, the whole country's collapsing, the infrastructure's collapsing. Despite the kind of glowing statistics about employment. Most people are living at a struggling to sustain their households. There's a deep disquiet. Biden has not addressed these issues. That is, of course, fueling Trump. I mean, the polls, they go back and forth, but oftentimes Trump is ahead. There's no enthusiasm for Biden at all. But yeah, they'll pull the plug. I mean, if the Democrats win, it may take a little longer, but it's over. I mean, they're going to pull the plug eventually.